Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and this time, well, I sort of mean that. Because after a lot of comments from you, wonderful people, I decided to give a certain series named Jujutsu Kaisen a go, and the following will be my initial impressions. Basically, I've now read the first 5 chapters, which I believe is the first arc of the series, named the Introduction Arc, very creative. But just as with the Black Clover videos, if you are enjoying this review, then please do like the video and subscribe to the channel, which will tell me rather conclusively that you, yes you, want to see more Jujutsu Kaisen content. And I should also probably point out that this is a strictly manga-based review. I haven't seen the anime yet, but it's quite new and I thought that I'd just stick with the manga because I'd be sure to run out of episodes rather rapidly. But let's begin with the premise of the series. Yuji Itadori is your average high school student, except he isn't, because for whatever reason he is gifted with superhuman physical abilities, but instead of using those to any degree whatsoever, he prefers to spend his time screwing around as part of the school's occult research club. And during the course of said occult research, the Occult Research Club accidentally unseals a powerful curse within a finger belonging to someone known as the King of Curses. Shenaniganry ensues, and eventually Yuji eats not just 1 but 2 cursed fingers, yum yum, and is then abducted by Jujutsu sorcerers and given a choice of immediate execution or execution after eating roughly 18 more fingers. Or I guess 14 more fingers and perhaps 4 thumbs. And so Yuji gets pulled out of high school and gets put into another high school, but a different, more sorcerific high school, where he will live and study until his scheduled execution, and that is the premise of Jujutsu Kaisen. And yeah, I'm pretty down with it. In many ways, Jujutsu Kaisen initially presents itself as a very standard sort of shonen model. You know, young high school boy with unique latent abilities takes up a call to action in order to help others. However, I think that one of the greatest weapons Jujutsu Kaisen possesses when combating that standard framework is the overall general tone of the series. Thus far, Jujutsu Kaisen is unapologetically morbid. There were so many moments in these first 5 chapters where I just went, oh, well, that's kind of dark, but that's the sort of thing I appreciate because it indicates to me that this series isn't going to be afraid to take on deep subject matter, like, say, death. When you think about it, death really isn't an idea that you'll see explored all that often in a shonen series because it can be quite depressing and reminds even teenagers of their ultimate fate in life, which is to no longer be living. So I was quite surprised when Jujutsu Kaisen decided to focus on that right out of the gate, specifically with the story involving Yuji and his grandfather who passes away over the course of the chapter, but not before imparting some final words onto Yuji, being, when it's your time to go, make sure you're surrounded by others. Don't end up like me. And I don't know how this plays with a much younger audience, but as someone who at this point in life has experienced a fairly substantial amount of family death in a wide variety of circumstances, that line hit me pretty damn hard. And death goes on to hover like a specter over just about everything, because what I really enjoy about this series thus far is it isn't a question of if Yuji will die, but when. His fate is sealed, but temporarily suspended, I suppose, and even Yuji is currently preparing for it by saying things like, I already know how I'm gonna go out. And I really do hope that the series follows through with that. 5 chapters is way too early to tell anything, but at this point, I think I might feel just a little bit cheated if we got to the end of Jujutsu Kaisen and Yuji did not fulfill this death prophecy that was set up, and I would much rather see him fulfill his grandfather's words by dying with lots of people around him. It would be extremely bittersweet, but it's a unique spin on the genre that I'd very much be on board with. The shonen protagonist not destined to become the strongest or some sort of king, but instead the protagonist who is simply destined to die. Once again, that's pretty morbid as hell, but I'm very interested in the idea. And the world further reflects this through its main power system of curses. I don't think I know enough about them at this stage to draw any real conclusion, but it does seem to have this Nen-like aspect to it, where curses are just invisible to most people, not exposed to very specific circumstances, and only curses can be used to combat other curses. And I actually really love the metaphor that was used to describe curses being the use of poison to fend off other poisons, because it presents an inherent danger with using your power at all. Like, there is no force of good or purity in the series, it's all bad, very bad, but we need to use the bad to fight the worse. Which, speaking of, Jujutsu Kaisen is pretty damn well set up because the goals of our protagonist just so happen to align pretty much entirely with the goal of our assumedly major antagonist. Yuji wants to find and eat all of the Sukuna pieces in order to die and then rid the world of his curse, but at the same time Sukuna wants Yuji to find all of the pieces to combine and regain his former power. So we have this really weird but fun dynamic where the protagonist and antagonist aren't really competing against each other. In fact, they should be very much helping one another, which I think is pretty insidiously ingenious. With that said, if I had to pick a weaker aspect of the series at this point, and remember, it's only 5 chapters in, so it's hard to judge, but I would say the characters at large. Beyond Yuji, I can't really say I connected with many, if any of them, and when it comes to Yuji, it's mostly through empathy for the situation with his grandfather. Everyone else is kind of difficult to pin down, but Yuji seems like a bit of everything. He's got a piece of that very composed, cool guy happening, but he's also got a slice of derpy eccentricity, as well as some super serious introspective drama. He also has a clear, perky quality about him, which is demonstrated with my favorite Yuji line thus far being, "My name is Yuji Itadori. I'm into girls like Jennifer Lawrence. Nice to meet you." Which just tells us everything we need to know about him. It's a perfect introduction. I think it's what we should all be doing. So he has a bit of everything going on, but I feel like we have yet to explore any of those features in any great amount of depth, which obviously we're so early on. But as a result, when I think of Yuji currently, I sort of have this picture of his blank face and no real strong feelings towards him one way or another, but I think I like him. Probably the worst character in this regard for me would be Fushiguro. I have absolutely no feelings regarding him whatsoever because he's just sort of, there at the moment. He's cool, he has a nice design, but I don't know a single thing about him. But with that said, for an opening arc, that's not at all necessary because I'm sure he'll have his time to shine later. In terms of characters though, the saving grace for everything is definitely Gojo. When he appeared, I was like, oh, finally someone in the series with an amazing design and a clearly defined personality. He's just so expressive that even though I know nothing about him, I feel like I know him, who he is, which is a powerful Jujutsu dude bruh with a great sense of humor that he uses to cope with the macabre profession that he has somehow found himself in. In fact, I think my favorite line of the series so far came from Gojo when we saw the whole flashback with Fushiguro begging Gojo to find a way not to execute Yuji, and then we jump cut to the present where Gojo just casually states to Yuji, "So let me reiterate, you are going to be executed." That was flawlessly executed black comedy. So Gojo is definitely the character with the greatest sense of comedy thus far, which is nice because it breaks up the morbidity happening, I suppose, everywhere else. And there are definitely other comical characters like the principal or our female student Nobara, but neither of them were quite as solid as Gojo. Plus, it's incredibly hard not to be intrigued by someone wearing any form of masking. It makes me wonder what's hiding behind the blindfold or if he needs to use it as a condition for his own cursed prowess. Having briefly brought up Nobara, she was a very late addition to this early arc, although I do quite like her generally combative style of the hammer and nail. It's quite unrefined and very, very brutal, which only goes to reinforce a lot of what I currently love about Jujutsu Kaisen. It's not afraid to dive into a more grotesque aesthetic, which is especially prominent when it comes to the cursed-based creatures. And it's also just interesting that the entire power system of this world is basically fueled purely by negativity. I believe the quote was, "Pain, regret, humiliation. The more people dwell on bad memories, the more these places become receptive to those feelings." And it just makes me wonder if there can ever be anything resembling a happy ending to a series like Jujutsu Kaisen. Because to get rid of the world's major threats, you'd need to basically achieve a utopian society with no negative emotions whatsoever, and that just seems very unlikely, even for fiction, which gives it a slight flavor of Berserk, a story about struggling against the inevitability of the world itself. But speaking of other manga vibes, Jujutsu Kaisen hits me right in the Bleach, very early Bleach that is, when it was a slightly darker story about a high school student fighting hollows plaguing the real world before it turned into whatever it turned into. And that's a really good thing because that initial shade of darkness is what really attracted me to Bleach. So I do enjoy that Jujutsu Kaisen operates in that sort of sphere as well. In terms of art, something that I have noticed in these early offerings is that Gege Akutami seems to really enjoy these very narrow panels, whether it's horizontal or vertical. Akutami makes very frequent use of these narrow rectangular shapes rather than opting for a more rounded square style of design, which is much more common in manga. And I know that was a kind of stupid thing to say, a rounded square and all, but these narrow panels do give the series a unique aesthetic and page identity. In addition to that, Akutami makes very common use of breakout panels like this one here, where the artwork isn't actually contained within the shape of the panel. And other mangaka do this on occasion, but it's usually only for big dramatic events like character reveals or some sort of action piece. Otherwise, the large majority of shonen authors very much play within the boundaries of their established panels. But I really love Akutami's style here because it gives you the illusion of a satisfying and rigid panel structure, but it allows the images within those panels themselves to truly stand out, even when we're just engaged in basic dialogue. So it's very much like the panels are acting as a background frame to the image rather than containing the image, if that makes sense. And I know that's probably a really tiny thing that I didn't need anywhere near that long to praise, but it's a piece of unique aesthetic flair, yet another piece of unique aesthetic flair that I like about the series. And one more thing I do enjoy about the art specifically is that Akutami makes very deliberate decisions regarding detail. For example, when we're in a more casual day-to-day situation, we are given this very flat character art and often with no background whatsoever, just often pure white or black negative space. Meanwhile, as soon as something curse related comes up, this unimaginable amount of detail just springs into existence, and it's almost as if it's breaking the wall between manga and reality, which once again is a very subtle decision, but it's quite a cool device to add tension to any given scene. Now, as for how this arc ends, all I can say is that this is pretty damn ballsy. We basically arrive at the end of the introduction only to be met with a mission report from the future, which basically states that one of our first year students is going to die. So Yuji, Nobara, or Fushiguro. Once again, bringing the motif of death death right back into things. It's the sort of thing that made me really want to launch into the next arc, but the more I think about it, the more kind of skeptical I become. The boldest possible decision would probably be to either kill Nobara or Fushiguro, but at the same time I have to ask myself, why? Because they both just been introduced and have yet to be explored at all. But then again, if it's Yuji, then it's kind of false drama because he'd have to be revived somehow, or die purely on a technicality to continue the series, because as much as he is resigned to death, we have some more digits to consume before that can happen. So I really did like the ballsy ending, I just have many doubts that said balls will be ultimately delivered. With that said, I think Jujutsu Kaisen is off to an incredibly strong start. I'm not wildly attached to the characters, but the whole concept and tone has me incredibly gripped. There's only one other thing I forgot to mention actually, which is one of the principal's lines that stated, "This I can say for sure. No Jujutsu sorcerer dies without regret," which is just another in a long line of rather grisly statements and ideas, all presented to us within this initial set of chapters. And I have to say, I am all on board for it. But that pretty much does it for this blind review of the introduction arc of Jujutsu Kaisen. And what do you guys think? Please do leave your thoughts in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you are keen to see more Jujutsu sorcery, then please do check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for very maybe regular Jujutsu Kaisen morbidity delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.